The World Cup. It's the most watched sporting event when it comes around every 4 years. The controversies, the passion, the goals, and the celebrations are a welcome distraction to the millions of people who tune in to watch the beautiful game. In honor of the tournament that starts this week across North America, I will be covering the history of the World Cup in 3 parts. This first part details the years from 1930 to 1958. And for this video's mutual aid, I'll be donating $1 for every view up to 500 to Soccer Without Borders, which is a charity that uses football as a vehicle for positive change, providing underserved youth with a toolkit to overcome obstacles and achieve growth, inclusion, and personal success. So, let's get into it. The first World Cup took place in 1930 and was hosted by Uruguay. Since people traveled by boats back then, countries were reluctant to send teams there, and only 13 nations took part. Interestingly, the English FA, who invented the rules of the game, saw FIFA as a competitor and didn't want to give any validation to it, so they didn't send their team. Fun fact, it wasn't even called the World Cup back then. As you can imagine, with only 13 teams, largely from South America, there wasn't a ton of global fanfare or even a fraction of the money in today's World Cup. But that doesn't mean the intense passion wasn't there. In fact, I would describe the tournament as unpredictable, sketchy, and full of carnage and controversy, as well as a bit of the ultra-violence. I say unpredictable because it snowed on the first day of the tournament. 4,000 people were in attendance at the Estadio Pocitos to see the first ever World Cup goal scored by Lucien Laurent in a match between France and Mexico in the capital city of Montevideo. Ultimately, the US, Yugoslavia, Uruguay, and Argentina all qualified from their groups, but what was sketchy was this crucial match between Argentina and France. This French player was through on goal, and the ref controversially blew the whistle 6 minutes early. Though the game restarted after protests, Argentina still won. Now, onto the ultra-violence. Argentina were heavy favorites to beat the USA in their semifinal, having beaten them 11-2 in the previous 1928 Olympics. But them Argentines didn't take any chances. Here's a quote from The Athletic. Quote, "In the opening minutes, Ralph Tracy suffered a broken leg from a horrific challenge by Alejandro Scopelli. But incredibly, Tracy played on until halftime and actually missed 2 chances to score. No excuse, is it? While another, Andy Ald, was temporarily blinded when an Argentine player knocked the smelling salts out of the American physio's hands into his eyes." End quote. Someone else had their lip ripped open, there were knee and stomach injuries, and even teeth were knocked out. Hell, the American physio even knocked himself out when he ran onto the pitch and spilled his chloroform. The other semi between Yugoslavia and Uruguay was less violent, but not without controversy. The ball was headed out of play and promptly booted back on by a policeman, with none of the officials apparently noticing. Still, at least these utterly incompetent referees all looked pristine while committing their crimes against football. They wore shirts, ties, and nice outfits. Quite the look. The final had a bit of a sense of violence too. Guns and knives were frisked from Argentine fans, while Uruguayan fans issued death threats to Argentinian midfielder Luis Monti. They told him that if Argentina won, they'd kill his grandma and auntie. Uruguay ultimately won 4-2 with the final goal scored by a one-armed striker by the name of Hector Castro, aka El Manco, who had lost his arm in a freak accident in his youth. While the tournament was chaotic and painful, it did cement FIFA as the central figure for nation-based global football, as opposed to the Olympics, which was the previous organization that held international games. Though they were the champs, Uruguay decided not to attend the 1934 World Cup in Italy as a protest for many European nations not attending in 1930. On the surface, there was less violence, but history buffs know that this World Cup was under the fascist regime of Mussolini, who personally asked coach Vittorio Pozzo to only select fascist party members. With the tournament now expanded to 16 teams, Italy had a win at all cost mentality, which went beyond anything that could be considered acceptable now or then, including brutal levels of physicality and suspicious refereeing performances. Egypt, who literally missed the boat in 1930, defeated Palestine in the qualifiers to become the first African nation to compete in the World Cup. A day before Italy's match against Austria, Mussolini had a dinner with the Swedish referee Ivan Eklund, and in the following match there were situations in which the referee could have favored the Italians. Eklund would also be the referee in the final instead of the Belgian referee that had been elected earlier. The quarterfinal between Italy and Spain was another extraordinary event with a mix of extreme brutality, including several fights with top-class football.
Ultimately, Italy faced Czechoslovakia in the finals. At full time, it was a 1-1 draw, and in extra time, Italy won 2-1. Though this World Cup was a complete display of fascism, it did further legitimize the tournament and FIFA's grip on world football.
There were no World Cups in 1942 and 46 due to World War II, but the 1950 World Cup in Brazil is considered as one of the most important due to the fact that football and the tournament itself was on the decline. After World War II, many countries were broke and trying to rebuild, so Brazil took it upon itself to host the tournament and build massive stadiums to host the 13 countries which took part in it. That number is low, but this is because many pulled out for financial reasons. This was also the first World Cup that England took part in, who faced the biggest upset when they were beaten by the USA 1-0. The format of 1950 was a bit different, whereas instead of knockout rounds, there were 2 group phases. Brazil was the favorite to win, of course, and only needed to draw with Uruguay on the final day to win it, but they ultimately lost 2-1, and this wouldn't be the last time that Brazil would be devastated as a host country. The 1954 World Cup was held in Switzerland, which saw the highest scoring World Cup game between Austria and Switzerland that ended 7-5. This was a very hot match with a high of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This tournament also had what is called the Battle of Bern, which was a match between Brazil and Hungary that erupted in pitch invasions and sparring that continued even after Hungary won, where the Brazilian players broke into Hungary's locker room. And the final was another big upset. Everyone expected Hungary to beat West Germany after beating them 8-3 in the group stage, and they also hadn't lost a game in 4 years. However, West Germany did have an advantage in their shoes, which had replaceable studs. Though Hungary took an early lead, West Germany came back and won 3-2 in what many call the Miracle of Bern. Though Hungary fell into despair, the Germans finally had something to feel proud about after World War II, and eventually their football culture expanded. The final tournament for part 1 of this 3-part series is 1958, in which Sweden hosted 16 countries. This was the first tournament where a draw in the group stages no longer led to extra time, and so the World Cup experienced its first goalless draw between England and Brazil. But more notably, this is the World Cup where the exciting style of play that Brazil is now known for came to prominence, called Joga Bonito, or the beautiful game. Not only that, but this was the first tournament featuring the legend Pelé, who at 17 years old became the youngest ever goal scorer in a World Cup final, scoring not just once, but twice. Brazil took this World Cup very seriously. For example, back then, most teams just had a manager, assistant, and a physio, but Brazil hired a whole backroom staff that included a dentist and a psychologist. Managed by the experienced Vincent Fiola, many saw him less as an authority and more of a quirky guy, like he was accused of falling asleep in the dugout. However, despite these quirks, the man knew what he was doing. He pioneered the 4 at the back concept and played a 4-2-4 formation, emphasizing the use of the wings. Though omitted at first due to lack of defensive work, right winger Garincha was crucial to Brazil's success in 1958 and 62 when Pelé was injured. And he is also considered by some as the greatest and most joyous dribbler ever seen in football. And Brazil dominated throughout the tournament with 1 draw and 5 wins in a tense quarterfinal against Wales that ended 1-0 with Pelé scoring his first World Cup goal. He then got a hat-trick against France in the semis and made it to the finals.
Cheio do gingado da perna torta, cruzou para trás, dominou, fez o passe do Pelé, furou, voltou, Pelé emendou lá dentro! Para ele, aí Didi, empurrou na frente pro Pelé lá dentro!
Their opponents in the final, Sweden, were also dominant with a similar record during the tournament, but as most footballers back then, they played quite dirty. In a semi-final known as Schlacht von Göteborg, Fritz Walter was fouled so hard that he couldn't continue. There was also an incident in which a Swede kicked a German player, so he kicked back, but the Hungarian ref only gave a red card to the German player, leaving them with 9 men with the score 1-1. Perhaps the ref was still a bit bitter about 1954. Regardless of all the fouls, Pelé, Garincha, and the rest of the Brazilians beat Sweden's Harambal and won 5-2 after some amazing goals from Vava, Pelé, and Zagallo. This is still the highest scoring World Cup final and also holds the record for the youngest and oldest goal scorers in a final, that being Pelé and Niels Lidholm. Though Brazil was nervous and went down 1-0 in the first 5 minutes, the Swedes were simply bewildered by Brazil's brand of football. This was the first of Pelé's 3 World Cup victories, something that no other man has matched. But check this, the Brazilians were humbled in victory and in fact waved Sweden's flag after their win, which received a standing ovation from the Swedish fans. And despite the loss, to this day, this is Sweden's best ever World Cup finish, so they had a lot to be proud of. Their hosting of the World Cup was also considered to be the best yet.
So from knives and death threats to jogo bonito and professional hosting, this was the first third of the history of the World Cup. Next week, I will be diving into Brazil's dominance and England's only World Cup win, to how Argentina used football to whitewash their dirty war and the infamous Hand of God incident. Enjoy the start of the World Cup, everybody. See you next week. Thanks for watching, and stay blessed out there.